does. They make approaching difficult, something compounded by the fact that you really don't have a choice, seeing how Steve will gain a constant incremental advantage on you, for as long as you leave him alone. Having all this contained in just a single button press is what makes this character so strong. If you're one of the few characters that can deal with blocks well, you still have to actually fight the rest of the tools Steve has. Blocks are possibly the single most powerful move in all of Smash history, at least when viewed in the context of this game. However, while blocks are definitely the most powerful aspect of this character, we are far from done exploring the depths of what Steve can do. It may be hard to believe now, but there was a solid period of time where the public consensus on Steve was actually quite divisive.
So how do you feel about Steve?
He's
As like-
weird. I heard a lot of people saying, you know, he's goofy, but he's not great. And then everybody said he was the best in the game and blah, blah. You know that stuff that people say. And now people are back to like, he's okay.
Some of his more degenerate strategies had not quite been cooked up yet, or were believed to not be quite as consistent as they ended up being, and he was far from optimized in many other ways. As a result, people were not quite sure where to place him. He was seen as a slow, clunky character with some really weird mechanics tied up to him, like placing blocks on stage. How good could that really be? Of course, what makes Steve as good as he is not really the easiest thing to just gauge on a quick look. That's kind of why this video is as long as it is. Some of the more basic aspects of the characters were discovered really fast, of course. Like, people didn't doubt how good diamond tools were, or how powerful some of his specials were, but it was just kinda hard to tell how practical and realistic they were when weighing them against his presumed weaknesses. People really needed some hands-on experience with the character before they could say anything for certain. And as it turns out, there would be quite a while until they had a chance to do that, because Steve was released on October 13th, 2020, narrowly avoiding the award of being the worst thing to happen to the game that year. Needless to say, tournaments were not currently happening, and online tournaments are, well, you know, online. And as we all know, Ultimate is known for its stellar online, making it just not a good time to prove any character's viability, with some characters being a lot better online than offline and so on. So all of the speculation around Steve would remain just that, speculation, and it did for quite a while. He was dropped right in the middle of the biggest tournament route in Smash history. It would not really be until fall of 2021 that tournaments would start to happen again. This resulted in one very unfortunate thing. Steve went completely under the radar when it came to balance patches. Despite the fact that several patches were released in the coming years, none of them changed Steve in any meaningful way. He was included in some of them, but the changes were largely bug fixes that came as a result of minecart and blocks, some of which are kinda still in the game, by the way. Steve's power level was very clearly hard to pin down, both on the players and the developers front, so there wasn't much outcry for Steve being nerfed in the first place, which makes sense, since how would we know there were no tournaments to gather data from. The opinion of the character would slowly rise throughout the coming year, however. The combination of his performance in online tournaments, and giving the character some time to develop, started to shape the vision of what the character really could do. But until we got some more tournaments going, it was really hard to prove how good he actually was. Of course, by then it was already too late. The final balance patch was released on December 1st, 2021, over a year after Steve's inclusion. Nintendo has some really strange policies when it comes to patching their games. I've been over my disagreements in how the patches were implemented in the past, how they focus on buffing weird and arbitrary aspects of some characters, resulting in characters being buffed on paper, but the changes being so small that they don't actually cause the character to be much stronger. I have a whole video on this I made a while back, if that should interest you. All of this was fine back then, when the game was in a bit more of a balanced state, as in before Fighters Pass 2. If a balance patch dropped and it was a bit of a dud, then who cares, the game was already in a good place. The problem with Smash's balance patches is that they were nearly always released together with some kind of content drop, and rarely outside of that. It makes it feel like it's just another side order to the meal you bought, as opposed to a tool that exists to ensure the game stays in a healthy place. It should not surprise you then, that when the final piece of DLC dropped, only a single balance patch was added afterwards. To say that this was a bit reckless is an understatement. Releasing a whole batch of DLC characters, a majority of which are heavily pushed, only to then shut the lights off and leave is just asking for trouble. I can only imagine, since none of the devs saw anything wrong with these characters, the player base didn't have any huge complaints. They thought it would be fine to shelve the game and move on. Of course, this is not the case. Fighters Pass 2 was released during a hazy time competitively, with no results to back up claims. If I said, I think Steve is the best character in the game, then that's really all there is to it. Smash players already really love speculating on characters' viabilities, and many times they are wrong about it. Results really are the only solid rack you can hang your opinions on when it comes to this game. People used to think Shulk was a secret top tier in Smash 4, and turns out he was really bad. People used to think Shulk was a secret top tier in Ultimate, and, well, I mean, he's a lot better, but not quite top tier. If you look back at people's tier lists from years ago, you'll see so many bizarre placings. And that's because figuring out a character's viability just takes time. That's natural. So I totally get the reluctance to introduce any major balance changes to these characters with so little feedback to go on. If you're going to do something as drastic as nerf a character, I feel it's only fair that you have a good reason to do so, with solid points to back it up. So I do get that when they made the final balance patch, they didn't want to take shots in the dark and hope they hit the right mark, not caring who was caught in the crossfire. However, that just really leaves me wondering why on earth they decided that should be the final patch. I doubt the game is locked so far away in the Nintendo vault that it would be a huge hassle to dig it up again, so it must be some kind of policy that just decides that this was the last one, to make the game get some time to finally simmer and officially stop development for the game. I guess their idea is just to let sleeping dogs lie, even if that dog is like sick and could really use some medicine right now. Which is, of course, a shame, because a solid balance patch right now could really reinvigorate this game. To the people who claim Nintendo does not keep an eye on competitive Smash, this is demonstrably untrue. I am sure Nintendo is well aware of how broken Steve is. They had a solid grasp on which characters were top tiers and which deserved to get nerfs and which didn't. They were clearly paying attention to the meta of the game. If they truly didn't care, then they wouldn't have bothered with any of this. I don't know to what extent anyone who worked on this game still follows Smash since the last patch, but I feel it's basically impossible someone there has not gotten the word of the wind that Steve ended up being quite unbalanced, which just makes it hurt all the more because of this seemingly set-in-stone policy. They are completely unwilling to go back and do more patches, even when the game could really use one now more than ever. It was fairly irresponsible, in my opinion, to throw all these characters into the game at a time where there was no real way to see if they were over the line or not. All these characters kinda got to hide behind a smokescreen until the threat of nerfs was already gone. For whatever reason, they chose to draw a hard line in the sand, and once they crossed it, they did not look back. And the time they drew this line was just too early. I understand wanting the game to be completely simple, not constantly go back and fix things, especially since it's been so long since the last one. Consequences, it destroys your replays, which is a little bit of a shame. But at this point, I really wouldn't mind it. Just looking at the massive amount of replays I don't even remember saving. I believe that if they just kept supporting the game with just balance patches for 1 or 2 years, they would have easily been able to catch some of the really silly stuff that came as a result of Fighters Pass 2. And I think that really is the greatest shame when it comes to Smash's patches. Smash still has live events. I don't really know why. I can't say I've ever heard, like, anyone ever talk about these, let alone actually participate in them, but you get a pop-up about them every once in a while, so someone is still involved in upkeeping this game in some way at least. It's not like the game is truly buried yet. So is it so much then to ask for just one final patch? Well, yeah, probably. I doubt it will ever happen. Maybe if Ultimate Deluxe gets announced for Switch 2, we'll see some changes. But for this game, I think the train has left the station a long time ago. So, without any threats of getting nerfed, in the midst of the haze and smoke, the dragon slept still, laying dormant waiting for someone to awaken him, which, as we would see, would not take too long. Minecart might be one of the single most crazy moves to ever pass playtesting in this game. Like, I kinda get how they thought blocks would not be as problematic as they are, since it was a very unusual move with unusual consequences. But Minecart, on the other hand, is just a move that I think is pushed way beyond the usual power level of Smash Ultimate. Like, sure, there are a lot of moves in this game that are pushed. A decent amount of characters in this game have at least 1 or 2 moves, where you just go, wow, I can't believe this move is real. Sometimes these moves are a little bit more blunt in how good they are, and other times they're a little bit more deceptive. These moves are usually attached to characters that are otherwise not very impressive, and have just regular movesets generally speaking. You can get away with characters having more splashy, strong moves, as long as the character is rounded out in other places. Moves like Diddy Kong's Banana, Zero Suit Down B, Bayoneted Up B, and Side B are likely some of the best specials in the game, and would be quite absurd on most other characters if you just gave it to them without compensating for it. However, these characters pay the price for having these moves in more subtle ways, having been consciously designed with the greater character in mind. It's just basic balancing. Something I felt Ultimate had a good grasp on until it nosedived around Fighters Pass 2. You should make characters that have peaks and valleys in terms of their moveset. That's what gives each character their own sense of identity. What I mean is, they're usually held back by the greater design of the character. Steve is not really one of these characters, and Minecart is one of my less favorite move designs. Minecart is a moving special slash projectile that uses 1 iron. Steve will enter the minecart and start riding it forwards. Should you hit anyone along the ride, they will be launched. If you have gold and redstone, you can do an even more powerful version of the minecart that goes faster. So far, so good. If this was all the move did, I really think it would have been fine. But of course, as you probably know, it doesn't quite end here. Steve can jump out of the minecart, and it will keep going forwards, at which point it can actually grab people, and they will be trapped inside the minecart, even if they shield the attack. This is what makes the move so good, and it should not be hard to see why. I really can't believe nobody objected to a projectile command grab while playtesting. It seems like one of those unwritten rules of design that they kind of just shouldn't break. There are a decent amount of command grabs in this game, as in moves that also ignore shields. You're Usually they're specials, which means you can use them in the air, making them a good mix-up on shields. There are also moves in the game that can be either a normal attack or a command grab, like Monkey Flip, and that move is already really good. However, in that case you have to commit to one or the other. It has the ability to be either, but you have to choose before you use it. Having both in one at the same time like this really makes a world of difference. I really don't even know where to start with this move. It really encapsulates the problem I have with a lot of Fighters Pass 2. Most of the characters have the feel that they only really exist to see how far they can push a character concept boundary. Just how much range can we get away with? What if we make an FGC character with an even more rudimentary game plan? What if we make a character that's just a little bit better at everything than most characters? All of these characters push the limits in many ways across many moves. But despite how many missteps I feel they made with these characters, I still feel they fall just within the admittedly fairly arbitrary line in my head of what should be accepted as a move in Smash. Steve's minecart, however, does overstep this line in my opinion. We kinda see the same justification as with a lot of his moves, where since it requires a resource to use, that warrants making the move way stronger than it would be otherwise. The cost of one measly iron feels like nothing compared to how good the move is, especially when you keep in mind that Steve is inherently rewarded for mining in the first place. To really put it into perspective, they felt the need to keep a lid on Banjo's Wondering, a move that does not even come close to being as good as minecart. Yet minecart just needs a little bit of heavily encouraged camping to get as many uses as you can mine. It really goes to show how far the pendulum has swung in terms of power, just from one fighter's pass to the other. The scale of balance is all out of whack here. Anyways, enough theoretical doom and gloom about how broken this move is. I feel the best way to show that is just to dive into the details. The main issue with this move really is that simply having a projectile command grab is really good. Generally projectiles get to be safer because of how shields deal with them well. There are of course other ways to dodge them as well, but shields are usually the most consistent way. Projectiles usually have a lot of end lag afterwards, which makes them still safe because of the range, but you will likely be able to close the distance if you can shield the projectile. Steve completely ignores this, not just because you can't shield the move, but also because he has very little end lag after using the move, being able to jump out and act very quickly. This can make the move pretty hard to deal with, but the big part is how it's practically impossible to punish Steve for using it, unless he uses it very close to you. Again, if this was all the move was, it would just be very strong, but as I mentioned, the move initially has a normal hitbox as well, and is active for as long as he stays in the cart. This creates a very strange scenario where you often have to guess if Steve is going to jump out of the cart or not, as if you're prepared to shield the initial hit, he may just jump out before that and catch you with the grab part of the move. The most messed up scenario that can happen, however, is the case where you shield the first hit, and then while your initial is done, Steve jumps out, and if you don't roll away immediately, the minecart will still grab you, since it's now a command grab. Of course, if you roll away, you'll still grab the minecart, so that's not happening. If you roll a spot dodge, you'll end up right in Steve's face eating a backer or an anvil. It's a very tricky spot to be placed in, where you have to be very quick to read what Steve is going to be doing next, or face the consequences.
很多东西我都
Initially,
不知道
when
他们
Steve
怎
uses
么
this
想
move,
出来
it
的，
has armor,
太
and
太
not just
太
the
夸张
design.
了。
It has like
Yeah.
3 different properties, all of which are kind of weird. First off, the minecart itself has
然后他们
a
就我现在学就是怎么用 AI 就是一种特殊的 AI 模型去
knockback armor,
学习，
pretty
就
obtuse if
是
you don't know how it works, but
就是
basically it
去
means that
training
if
这
you
种
launch it too far, will be armored and will
tags
not knock him out of the minecart. For moves like projectiles, it can
然后
actually
去
be
training
quite
tags 的话
since the minecart will absorb the hit
嗯
and just drop Steve out.
他们这边
afterwards.
考虑的东西还
However,
挺
there are a
多
lot
的，
of
就
moves
是
that will also
你
miss
一句话
and only hit the minecart depending on the spacing.
你
This
你
is
你
all
得
well and
有一
good,
个
but probably
长
the
期
most
的
egregious and
一个
unnecessary
记忆
part
和
of this
短
move
期
is
的
how
记
the
忆。比
minecart
如说一句
has a proc
你一个大
gauge
paragraph
that
里面，
can
你可能
control
有一些
during
词或者
the
句子
phase of using the
是
move.
比较
This
关
will
键的
cause，the
你
move
必
to
须要一
quite
直去
literally
记住它，
ignore attacks
然后你
like
然后你就
up close
想办法
range
去记住它
moves,
们。
as well as projectiles
然后还有一些
that
短期的
obliterate
可能
Steve
就
himself
是只
can
是
still be hit
单
during
一
the
句
spark,
话里面有
and the
用，
knockback
然后你
armor does
过了
not
这句
actually
话就
trigger
一点用没有。
in the minecart.
那就要怎么样去节约空间，去把这些东西全都
And
计
when it
算在
does
里
come
面。
up, it just feels very annoying. It just seems
Yeah.
so wrong.
I
in
think-
some
I mean,
cases, but that's how it works.
如果你整
Look at the
like
other
if your
parts of the
life
minecart, as in the part of the move that
and how much
determines
money you
attacks,
make is
both
tied to
Steve
this,
and
then you'll
minecart
probably be
have
very
some
smart.
funny stuff. For starters, they very intentionally
Yeah.
gave Steve really stubby legs during
然
his
后
animation.
还有什么？
nowadays
我还有我操他妈的！
specifically so the minecart
就是
can
我在
actually
想
fit into it
学这些东西的人，
Secondly,
难道还需要
the
学
minecart
语
is
言
likely
学
a
吗？
lot bigger
因为他这边
than
提
it
出一个
covers
新
Steve
的
up
概
to
念，
above his head,
就是说
meaning that certain moves
你的长期记忆不只是从左往右读的，你还可以从右往左读一个句子。就是说你一句话里面你的任何语言，好像是基本上大部分语言里面，甚至有些特殊的语言，你一个句子你从右往左，就从右边开始的单词，会影响到左边的单词。哇，这个东西我根本以前都没有想过。你比如说我们一般讲话就是主谓宾嘛，就是从左往右读，
Yeah.
就是 noun verb noun， 然后这种，然后其他都是一些 adjective 和 filler， 然后一般就是从左边是主语，然后右边是就是 like subject object 和 subject， 然后他这边提出的概念就是说， 可以一句话，我们可以不只是从左边往右边去记，也可以从右边往左边去记，然后也是有用的。然后我说 What the fuck， 这他妈的你普通人谁能想得出来？这种东西，感觉难道你要什么语言学的什么 professor 可以才总结出来的经验？我操，有点疯狂。
那能不同人一起做的？
我现在开始思考，一句话里面后面的句子影响到前面，但感觉有些可能 grammar 比较神奇的一些句子可能会影响了，比如说像 Japanese 是一般不是 object verb subject， 就我们 English 和中文都是这样的，然后 Japanese 的话是 object subject and then verb， 还是这个样子，所以可能对于一些语言来说，他们右边的词也挺关键的吧。I don't know, it's kind of crazy. Me when English is not the only language. That's crazy.
It should be the only.
bit too high, will have a much harder time hitting since the cart will absorb it instead. Basically, the cart acts like a shield for Steve a lot of the time, if they clash with other attacks. When Steve is in the minecart, the hitbox is actually surprisingly small, having a bit of a negative disjoint, though this is not exactly unusual for moving specials, since they move fast and cover a lot of distance anyways. Just a bit unusual for Steve to actually follow the usual design rules. The damage the move does is technically based on how fast Steve is moving, but a majority of the time it'll just be either the redstone boosted version or the regular speed version. But it can deal less damage if you're feeling a little silly. The boosted version is actually
Sean, are you excited? 下个星期要开学了。
really early percentages. Closer to the blast zone, it's just disgusting. The normal version is a lot less oppressive, but can still pack a serious punch given the right conditions. When Steve does
下个星期礼拜一开始赛。
it actually can grab you, which was a nice attempt to prevent what I mentioned earlier.
就还有
That still does happen, so better luck next
再过另外一个礼
time.
拜
We have
一
a bunch of hitboxes where the purple hitbox grabs you and the
哎
other
是下个礼拜一
in
吗
the？air, where you luckily cannot be grabbed. Also, when you're laying on the ground after a mistake,
不是吧？
you're unable to be grabbed.
而且下礼拜一对开学，
Think not taking a real option, since
就等于
getting
8天
grabbed
嘛
is
，8天左右
than。just getting launched. It's a bit weird to me that they chose
不是
to
9月
launch the
3号吗？
hitboxes on the side
9
so
号。
perfectly, when Ultimate is notorious for having projectiles
fuck?
with hitboxes that are smaller than their actual visuals. Like a cool axe you
下个礼拜二
really fits the axe and all. Should you get grabbed by the minecart,
看
carry
9
on
号
so you can escape it. Which brings me to my favorite
9号
mechanic in
是
all
星期
of
二
Smash,
哦
mashing. Just like with normal grabs, if you mash buttons on the controller or rotate
一
the
周
stick
做
while
2
trapped in
天，我
minecart,
操，
you
怎
will
么才
escape
懂
faster.
啊
I'll save you the whole rant this time, but I'm really not a fan
很开心啊
of
Wait.
in Smash.
Wait, that's
encouraging you to
crazy.
basically destroy your hand and
是不是很
control
开
我
心
周
to
五
get
考
out
完，我还
faster is
我还
not
可以玩
good,
3
in my
天。
opinion. I
？Yeah，
thought they learned this
Terrible.
lesson back in the day with the whole Mario Party fiasco, where they have to give out gloves to people who were hurting their hands playing minigames. I assume they thought people would just be mashing a little bit, but the ceiling for how much you can mash is really high. If you mash really fast, you can get out of some moves like this very, very quickly, and if you don't at all, your opponent has so much time to punish you for it. I just don't like that the line between surviving an interaction like this or not can often come down to something that is, in my opinion, not very interesting, fun, or very indicative of how the rest of the game is played. It's fine for normal grabs specifically, because the only thing you actually risk by not mashing like crazy is taking a little extra damage from a pummel. You don't stand a lot to lose if you don't mash, so you can just kinda choose not to if you're like me and don't really like doing it. However, for moves like minecart, you can sometimes lose your stock way earlier if you get hit by a speedy minecart at the wrong time, or can't mash out before Steve catches up to the cart. This is not something exclusive to minecart, of course. Lots of other characters in this game have similar things, but minecart is yet another culprit in this character-wide crime. I wish it didn't work like this, but that's how it is. Escaping the minecart does not give you control over your character until a staggering 30 frames after mashing out. In addition, it just kinda pops you up into the air in perfect range of up smash or any follow-up really. Make it so that hitting a minecart on stage is an almost guaranteed follow-up with a really strong smash attack, given that Steve keeps moving in the same direction, which is rarely an issue. This is somehow the better of the evils. The alternative being you falling off stage, which results in a very easy follow-up. Forward for some reason, is a spike. We'll talk about it more later, but this results in one of the meanest combos in the entire game. If you are at high percent, then it doesn't even really matter which one you get hit by, since the time you're trapped in the cart is proportional to the damage you've taken, so you can kinda just pick your poison in those cases. There are some rare cases if you get hit by a boosted minecart, and you get pushed off stage where you still might be able to make it back. It still puts you in a terrible position, but at least you have a shot at surviving there. So the minecart can actually only grab you when it's moving at a certain speed. When it slows down, it actually can't grab you anymore, even if you run into it. This makes for a bit of unclear gameplay in my opinion, since you can never really know exactly when the minecart is just slow enough to not grab anymore. I wish there was like an indicator, or that the cart simply despawned sooner. I've had some absolutely absurd cases like this, where the cart was actually pushed by the body blocking to the point where it gained enough speed to grab again. Turns out that minecart is also a boomerang projectile after all. It really is the lethality of minecart that makes this move so good. Once you're in the cart on Steve's wild ride, you basically have no choice but to accept your fate. With how safe and riskless the move is, for it to have this high of a payoff, it makes the move just so desirable to hit. And that's why Steve players will be throwing this move out a lot if they have the opportunity. The fact that it may cost them a single iron is nothing in the face of getting a really early KO, or an easy way to clean out a long stock. Not to mention that it interacts well with blocks, being good at scaring out close. Now, in all fairness, you will likely not get grabbed by the cart in a majority of cases. Once you learn to stop trying to shield Steve coming at you like a bullet train, you'll find that jumping will often solve your problems if you have some distance between you and Steve. However, this is something we in the biz call conditioning, and it's secretly the third thing that makes this move so good. If you jump a lot to dodge minecart, that's something that Steve players can pick up on very quickly. And now that safe jump option may be a first-class ticket to the blast zone, seeing how once again Steve can act very quickly out of the minecart to cover that jump. It's not just all the very oppressive aspects of this move that makes it so good, not just the much needed movement it allows for, but also the massive amount of conditioning the move applies to neutral. Having a projectile that you can shield forces people into the air. Even if most of the time you don't capitalize on that, having a move that forces your opponent to play jump rope at your demand is endlessly better than a move that can simply be shielded safely. The card is definitely worth its weight in gold. Or iron, I suppose. Before we move on, there's a few miscellaneous things I would like to go over. After jumping out of the cart, you can actually jump back into it and keep driving it. It can probably throw an opponent off if they've never seen it before. Even if the minecart has totally stopped, you can still do this, as long as you do it before it despawns. The redstone-powered tracks Steve places down are not actually just for show. If the minecart bounces back into the tracks with the torches, it will actually get another boost independent of the first one, which I'm sure you can mess up some people with. If you place a block on top of the minecart like this and just re-enter it, you can just kind of get into the wall, which is a little silly. Blocks plus minecart really just result in a bunch of unpredictable interactions. It's mostly fine as long as you just keep your distance from it, but there really is a ton of weird little interactions like this, which honestly are kind of fun to look at. Minecart is a very messed up move, and likely one of the most feel-bad moves to get hit by. It just sucks seeing you get wheeled away knowing the up smash or forward air is imminent. I think doing a projectile command grab is one of those things you just shouldn't do in Smash. Design-wise, they just kind of flew too close to the sun here in my opinion. If it just launched you and maybe did a bit of damage, that would really be so much better. And even if they do insist on it being a command grab, they really should let you act faster after escaping, making it so that Steve at least kind of has to predict what you do when you escape from it, instead of just getting to wait and react every time. There's a lot of good ways I think this character could be fixed, but that's for another time I suppose. There's a lot more to be said, so we kind of have to move on. When tournaments started happening again in late 2021, Steve would remain a fairly unpopular character. He would show up in top 64 and sometimes top 16 placings at majors, largely at the hands of two Steve players, Jake and Yanni, who would be by far the most prevalent players of the character during this time. Despite these showings, Steve never made any huge placings. However, people were kinda catching on to how ridiculous this character was, finally being able to see all the theoretical things the character was able to do in a real tournament. It would not be until February of 2022 before any Steves actually made it into top 8 at a major. At Glitch Infinite, a fairly lower stack tournament, but a major nonetheless, Jake was able to get 3rd, beating quite a few notable players in the process there. At the time, the pot was already kinda stirring with regards to Steve, being maybe a little bit better than people thought, and this was the first big data point in that direction. Despite this showing, no other Steve would get a top 8 placing in the following 3 months. And because of this, everyone thought it was basically back to familiar times, and kinda seemed to forget about the character mostly. This would be until May, when a fairly unknown player named Akula would seemingly out of nowhere take his first major win, using the character to win Maizuma top 7, and would just a few days later take another major tournament as it 7, once again using Steve and Donkey Kong. Somehow. I have a feeling that maybe Steve did most of the heavy lifting there. I probably can't keep going without shedding a little bit of light on Akula himself, as he is essentially the person who brought out the real potential of this character. He picked up Smash during the huge tournament route, meaning while he was fairly known in Japan at the time, he was quite under the radar when it comes to overseas matching, which is what made this sudden win at these 2 tournaments, with a character that was expected to be here. Now, of course, at the time, this was viewed as a bit of an anomaly, because it seemed so out of nowhere, and this must just be a 1 or 2 time thing in this case. There was, of course, also a lot of dissonance with all this happening in Japan. A lot of overseas Smash players had a tenuous view of how Smash worked there, seeing how people from Japan didn't usually travel to tournaments at the time, and overseas players would rarely travel to Japan either, of tournament results happening there, and not viewing a Japanese major win the same way they would view an American one. While this is likely out of ignorance more than malice, it has been remedied a lot in recent times. But at the time, nobody really wanted to consider that any of this meant anything. That Akula might just be a really good player, and Steve a very good character. They wouldn't believe it until they saw it themselves. And luckily for Akula, he was going to get that chance very soon. While Minecart is definitely the worst offender, Anvil does give it a good run for its money, being another projectile that uses iron, and since it does, it's another fairly pushed move. Steve spawns an Anvil below him, and can either ride it while it falls, or let it fall by itself. Unlike Minecart and blocks, I don't really think there's a huge fundamental design issue here, and really I think that's the case for a majority of Steve's moves. There already exist similar moves like Hydrant, which is perfectly fine, and haven't caused much problems. No, the main issue here, and this might sound a little silly, but the move is actually just too strong. Like, it hits too hard. Like, the numbers are just too high. Anvil's KO threshold is a huge mess. The move just straight up KOs too early. It feels just so off to get hit by this move at 80 or 90% and have your entire stock just explode out of nowhere for simply trying to hit Steve when he's in the air. I'm sure you've had this move hit you before, and have it just KO you way before you would expect it. The knockback on this move genuinely feels unnatural. It's the same feeling as picking up a carton of milk you thought was empty, only to realize it was full. The same feeling of walking upstairs while not really looking, and thinking there's an extra step when there's not. I feel a little jolt of surprise every time it happens, and if you don't feel the same way, I suppose that's fair. That's what having played this game and the game before it for an ungodly amount of hours will do to you. The move movie doesn't come out until frame 20, so it's not exactly that fast, but given that it has a ton of range being a falling projectile and all, you can use it very safely when you're launched into the air. Like I said, Steve has the choice to ride the Admiral down, which makes it a lot stronger. This is the version of the move that is just going to disintegrate stocks on contact. It deals a massive 18% damage, and has an astounding amount of knockback behind it. Riding the Animal down like this technically makes you a little bit more vulnerable than it would be otherwise. However, when you look at the hitbox, saying Steve is exposed here when he has this massive hitbox under him is like saying Rob is not top 5 in the game, simply untrue. Should you jump off, the move is a little bit weaker, and the Animal will drop by itself. Don't think it's less dangerous though, because it still really does a number on you if you get hit by it. Steve once again can very quickly disengage from the strong version, meaning you still kind of have to guess which one he's gonna go for. When you just let the Animal drop, it is admittedly a lot weaker, dealing 10% instead of 18 when Steve's not riding it, though it still serves as a huge deterrent nonetheless. Should the Animal land and then refall again, then it will actually be even weaker, which can happen if you place it on a block or something. Granted, this is not that big of a deal, but can be a viable part of a nasty ledge trap setup. The hitbox is the same across all versions, being just about the size of the Animal visual, which is absolutely massive in other words, being a huge disjoint that you don't really want to be anywhere near. Additionally, when the Animal lands, there is another hitbox, really just adding a whole bunch more beef to the whole thing. It can be really scared to shoot against the Animal because of this, and landing it can cause a lot of extra stuff, which you can actually capitalize on. Even parrying the last hit leaves you quite vulnerable. Since it deals so much damage, it's able to beat out a lot of aerials trying to hit Steve, if you can even reach him at all behind the massive Animal. Challenging this move at any point is a huge fool's errand, and will more likely than not end up with you cancelling the Animal hit at best, and at worst it'll send you to an early grave, unless Steve rides the Animal all the way down, and you get the final hit. Actually trying to hit Steve at this point is just a bad idea. You're way better off trying to avoid the move altogether, seeing how every Steve in the universe will be using this move unless it's measured in the air, because the risk versus reward is just that skewed. The risk being having to dig for one more iron to use, and the reward being a huge projectile that KOs as early as most heavyweight smash attacks. The move also has a ton of really strange interactions. You can imagine, given the fact that the move is a weird falling physics move, the move is actually a little bit bugged. If you minecart off the Animal after you've used it, it'll remain the strong version even if Steve is not on it, which is very strange, and I haven't really seen a lot of people ever bring this up. Just makes it a lot more scary if you can set up a ledge trap using both minecart and Animal somehow. Steve can do the footstool to Animal as a punish when up close. A lot of characters in this game have up-close footstool punishes, where you quickly jump on their head after you use an attack, something that will stun them for a bit and give you time to throw out a move afterwards. Most characters don't get too much out of this, since the move has to be directly below the character in some way, but this works out perfectly for Animal, since it does just that. This effectively lets you punish attacks with a move that is way too slow to do so otherwise. It actually really rounds up Steve's up-close punish game nicely, making him able to punish moves that otherwise would be way too quick. The fact that you can follow up with an Anvil is pretty absurd though. Like, this thing will take stocks at like 80% just for shielding otherwise safe hits. So this move has been all nice and fun so far, but we gotta talk about bones. Quick question, do you know which way Anvil launches you when you get hit by it? As you can see here, it can launch you either way, but what actually determines the way it sends you? Well, it's bones. The top bone, to be specific. The top bone is a property tied to your hurt box, and basically determines what is considered to be the left side of your character or the right side. It's essentially a line going through your body. You see, Anvil doesn't launch in any specific direction. Instead, it checks which side of the top bone it collided with, and launches you the other way. So if you get hit on the left side of the top bone, it launches right, and vice versa. This seems pretty simple, right? Basically, if you think the Animal is going to land on the right side of you, and launch you left, you DI down and to the left to survive longer. Wrong. You see, the move actually launched you to the right instead. And now that good DI is actually awful DI, causing you to lose your stock even earlier. This is because your top bone does not always move around with your character, meaning what the game considers to be the left side or the right side of your character does not always match what would make logical sense. There are a few moves in this game that have the character lean almost all the way back behind the top bone, meaning in some cases like this, the character is always considered to be on the left side of the Anvil, almost regardless of where it hits. As I mentioned, this is particularly unfortunate, since DIing the move correctly can make you live way longer, and DIing it wrong is very detrimental. These are basically all case by case, and there's no consistent logic to how the top bone moves, or does not move during certain attacks. A lot of the time your assumptions will probably be correct, since it stays generally in the center of your character during most animations, but be aware that there are outliers. If your character leans forwards a lot, or shifts their body a lot during the animation, there's always a chance the top bone does not move as much as you would imagine. The same thing applies to getting hit by Anvil in the air. You still want to try to DI down and in the direction it launches you. However, due to the slacker angle of the aerial version, if you don't really know which way it's going to launch you, DIing straight down will be much better than no DI or DIing the wrong way, since down DI accounts for both directions equally. It is very silly that this move works like this, or more silly that the top bone is out here living its own life sometimes, but now you are aware of it at least, so get testing if you find any strange interactions with it. As you can imagine, this has some ramifications of the footstool to anvil punish I just talked about, but in this case it's actually to our benefit for once. You see, when you footstool someone, it actually puts you in the exact same spot above the character every time. I think it literally puts you directly on top of the top bone actually, since auto turnaround characters will turn around if you move just a tiny bit after footstooling them. This means that you can predict exactly which way the anvil will launch you just by testing it out, since after a footstool like this, Steve will always be in the exact same spot above you. The way Steve faces does not influence this in any way as far as I can tell. It's all dependent on which way you are facing at the time of the footstool, so if this ever happens to you, you have no excuse not to DI it perfectly every time. However, there are two exceptions, that being DK and Sonic. These characters actually get launched either way depending on the timing of when Steve uses down air, but only when they're facing to the left. Move over buffed left facing Cloud, nerfed left facing Sonic is in town. If you mash down air as fast as you can, Sonic will be launched to the right instead of the usual left, meaning you basically have a 50-50 on him, where you can delay the angle by a few frames, and it will then launch into the left instead of right. You would imagine this is because the top bone moves around during the footstool animation, but no, it actually stays in place entirely. So I honestly don't know why it happens, and why it seemingly only happens on these two characters, and only while they're facing left. There could be more characters like this. I didn't do extensive testing to be fair, but these two just jumped out very quickly. If you have any idea, leave a comment about it, and if we can get to the bottom of this, I'll pin the comment or something. I do find it very funny though, that I was able to find some anti-Sonic tech, only for it to be exclusive to Steve. Like, if that's not a monkey paw moment, I don't know what is. Anvil also has some really strange properties when used on the ground. The move pushes Steve up a bit, and then makes him fall back to the ground. Should anyone be close when he does this, for example after landing an attack on shield, you will actually be put on top of the anvil as well, where it will hit you and cause a guaranteed shield poke, even if you manage to shield in time, which Steve can then follow up on. This is of course very silly stuff. Just landing on top of the anvil at any point while it's falling will also cause the same thing to happen, but it just seems so jarring to see someone get taken off the ground like this, onto the anvil, and then have it just hit them regardless. It probably doesn't happen very often, but it's just so weird when I do see it. Like, I really feel like it shouldn't work like that, but with all the facts on the table here, I don't really think there's too much debate on whether or not this move is a little too good. It's a fine move in concept, just once again very poor power-wise, which is truly the biggest sin the move has ever committed. It might feel like such a minor offense compared to the more complicated transgressions of minecart and blocks, but believe me, when you're on the tasting end of the soup that is Steve's gameplay, Anvil's flavor is going to make itself known. For starters, it's basically another unpunishable projectile. This results in almost a free way to get back down on stage, since actually interacting with the Anvil is always going to be a lopsided proposition, meaning you basically have to respect it and be very careful in how you pressure Steve when he's in the air, which is a bit of an issue when by far Steve's biggest downside is that he moves slowly and otherwise would be really exploitable in the air. However, with the combination of Anvil, minecart, and blocks, Steve is more than capable of scrapping with you, even if he technically is in disadvantage. Seeing how the risk versus reward of trying to interact with any of these moves is simply not worth it unless you really know what you're doing. As a result of this, he is able to effectively get back on stage, when a lot of other characters with similar movement would have a much harder time, being able to undermine one of the character's weaker aspects. If these moves were a little bit more toned down, and you actually had a chance to interact with these moves without having to risk being severely hurt for it, I think there would be a lot less problems surrounding this character. I will say, however, and this goes for both Anvil and minecart really, when Steve does run out of iron, he really is very vulnerable. Without his two panic options, you can really see how unimpressive Steve's movement really is, having no choice but to slowly fall down or retreat to ledge. Even on stage he will not have minecart, so you can pretty safely corner him then, at which point he probably won't be able to mine for more. If you can keep up the pressure in a situation like this, playing Steve can feel almost helpless in a way. Getting Steve into this position can be pretty tricky however, and will take a lot of careful play avoiding all the moves that spend iron. Most Steve players will also likely not want to spend their last iron they have, and will likely hold on to it as a deterrent more than anything else. The difference between having a single iron and not having any iron is actually huge, since even if you just have just one, you still have to respect it. This is one of the cooler, more dynamic aspects of the character that I really wish shined through a bit more. On June 16th to 19th, the League Invitational was taking place, an invitational tournament hosted by the namesake himself. Despite having very few players attending, invitationals are usually considered majors, because of the high skill level usually present. This invitational used a voting crowdfunding style for choosing the players. However, also importantly was the fact that the two winners of Kagaribi 7 were also personally invited, those two being Asimo and Akala. Around the time leading up to this tournament, there had been a pretty major upshift in people's perception of Steve as a character. The prospect of him being good was now really on the table, likely spurred on by Akala's recent major wins. and the occasional regional and local win the character picked up in the months afterwards. We all pretty much knew what the character was capable of at this point, and all the crazy tech and absurd moves the character had to offer. The blood was already in the water, and the only thing the character needed was cold hard results. This would be the first time this breakout Steve player would have the chance to go up against all the highly ranked overseas players. It was time for Aquila to prove his mettle, and watch for this character's viability. And the result? Well, I think you can guess where this is going.
It continues. It continues, guys! 55! It continues!
55! There'll be no platforms around you, but you gotta get that one hit, and it just felt like...
I'm just building
Strategic rage, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, he dropped the anvil
And
on him,
that's
man.
it.
He's going right through. There he is. Don't go near it. He's gonna ride through.
Best shields, yeah, exactly. Yep, there's the back here. That's the game.
Honestly?
Oh, is this gonna be it?
Oh, it is.
Above him, the wall. Oh, wait. Got some tricks.
Yeah,
the up
that'd be it,
smash.
This would be the first taste of the sheer dominance this character is capable of. Aquila would go on to demolish the competition, not dropping a single set in the entire tournament. Now having taken major tournaments in the two biggest match regions, there was basically no more doubt regarding both Aquila's ability or Steve's potential. This was more or less the final nail in the coffin for Steve down players. Turns out this character was good. Like, really good. In the following months, there would be a massive flood of Steve discourse, and the first idea of even banning this character would begin to arise. This was not exclusively because of this tournament. It had been going on for a while, but it really was an eye-opening event for a lot of people who have perhaps not seen Steve been brought to this level before. Here we got to see front and center what this character is capable of, and it was not pretty. A cold and optimized Steve, well aware of the quite overpowered aspects of the character, a willingness to camp and nickel and dime every interaction for as many resources as possible, which would go on to define how this character is optimally played. Something that kinda came as a contrast to the, and I mean no shade by this, more freestyle type of gameplay we'd seen up to this point. Still, it's a fairly small data point in the grand scheme of things. The players may just not have been very acclimated to playing against Steve, and a lack of matchup knowledge as well. Wrapping your head around this character is not an easy task, and especially when you have to fight against that character. Being an invitational, there was a large amount of top players missing. Concluding this character is broken over just one showing like this is obviously a little hasty. We were just halfway through the year, and there were many tournaments left to go, many of which Aquila would attend. While Steve may have taken this one, nobody was gonna let him go for free. Little did we know that a new age was beginning. Not to sound like a broken record here, but I really can't believe they thought Steve's up tilt was okay. It doubles as both an up tilt and an up air. They are practically the same move. So what's the big deal with the move then? Well, it's a really fast up tilt coming on in frame 6, and frame 4 if you have golden tools. This is very fast for a move that only has 7 frames of lag afterwards. It's actually pretty absurd how fast you can spam this move. And they knew you'd be doing that too, since they let you just hold down the button to keep using it. The hitbox on this move is just absurdly big, like way bigger than it has any right to be. It covers both sides of Steve during the attack, and lasts for a staggering 4 active frames, reaching far into the air in the process, making it not only a solid anti-air, but more like a anti-your whole existence. The frame data on this move is quite absurd, and it just gets stronger depending on the material. Had that been all the move was, I think it would have been pretty pushed, but relatively harmless nonetheless. Sure, it being able to combo into itself a few times is very strong, but other characters do kind of similar things already, but we're far from done here, because you can actually move while using this move, which is a whole different dimension into the oppressiveness of this move. Usually in Smash you have multiple moves, they're held back by the fact that they push you back. Even if it's just slightly, they will inevitably push you to the point where you can get away. So you can imagine that some problems arise when you're able to move and use a fast low lag move like this. You can't just hold shield and wait until you get pushed out, since Steve can kinda keep pushing up against you while attacking. And not every character is going to be able to punish this move even. It's actually very safe.
哦，我在玩
A lot of characters that don't have
星
really
露
fast
古
out shield
墓。
options will likely struggle to fight back directly,
Oh,
which I really don't feel
Definitely
in
how-
how easy it is
Yeah.
to put someone in this position, especially if you have golden tools in which the move
That's
is
crazy.
even faster actually. Now there are a few things to
什么
keep in
原
mind.
原
Steve's
版
up
游
tilt
戏还
is
是
fair
什么
for hitting your
没有
shield.
特别特别
The
mod
mechanic
的
that makes moves sweet
加了很多
the
mod
more times you
110
land,
多个
this
mod
includes moves that hit shields, and it will happen fast
Wow.
since the move is so quick, meaning it's kind of worth it to shield a few hits before trying to escape. The
所以
limit
这个游戏的乐趣就是一
Though
直
this hardly
去种
matters
田
too
嘛。
much, the
对啊，
turn
然后可以
ability
去
also
探索
matters
世界
as well, so
它
the
这个
turn leads
内容还
to
挺多的
Sadly, when it comes to Diamond Up Tilt, a majority of the
这
time
老养老游
will
戏
destroy your shield in about 2 to 3 hits, since it deals a lot of damage, likely resulting in a shield poke if you don't get out of there by then. So it's not like any of this is that practical, really. Best advice I can give you is just to stay away at all costs. There's very little to be gained by trying to challenge this move, since it has so little lag. Now, if I told you it was
学习
about
怎
Hit
么样？
Wars, and not just like a little wars, but new world-ending
这个
levels
马上
of
学完，
wars,
还有10分
could
钟
you。believe that?
哇
Well, it doesn't
，10分钟
really
学完了吗？还是说你这个
Let's
课看
talk
完
about
但还没学
realistic？landing or or nil.
哦，没有，
Simply explained, it's a phenomenon where
怎么
during
说
certain
呢？
animations,
这个视频还有10 分钟，但是
characters
我
have
可能
more
学的话要
than
2倍
for
速
that
的时
matter,
间，
making it
哦，
可能
instantly
20分钟
The
到半小
exact
时。
specifics are a bit unnecessary to go into,
那好，
and are also very case
你就大概1
by
小时
case,
就
make an
整完
exact
了是吧？
science out of. But just so you know vaguely what we're talking about here, I bring this up once again because blocks have arrived to stir up
这一
chaos.
课马上学
Steve
完，
is able to do a no impact land when placing down blocks.
那你今天还要学
With
多
a
少
block
课
in？ the air and jump at the same time,
今天就
Steve
学
is
这一
able
课
to
就
land
行。
on top of the block
我
he
明天
just placed, making
还
it
剩3 节
easy
课，
to
我
in
明
the
天应该
air
能
while
学完。
still having access to his
哇
ground moves.
这节
I
课
think you can see where this is going. By using this, you are able to chain up tilts into each other.
下
where
面几节
as
课
long
我
as
看了
Steve
一下
is
那个
able to
时间，
place
好像都比较
blocks,
短一
and
点
it。can usually end it with an up smash for a stupidly
但
early
当然，
KO. If done
说实
properly,
话，这
this
个
can
其
still
实这
cause
个
very early
lecture 的
percentages,
时
and
长
all you need in
跟
theory
学
is
的
to
时
land a
长感觉
single
完
straight
全不能
6-frame
成
up
正比。
tilt with almost
它有
no
可
lag.
能
You really
它很
can
难的
just
东
be
西，他
living
讲
your
2
best
句话
life
就
and
讲
get
过了，
absolutely
但是你还要
demolished
自己
by
去
a
查。
sneaky up tilt at 20%.
对啊，
It's a
我
tragedy
现在就
to
是
see
这种
every
感觉，
time.
就是
Obviously, there
这
are
10
a few
分钟
characters in this
还
game
剩
who
10 分
do
钟的
similar
视频，我不
things,
知道还要
as
学
in。getting failed
可
combos off
能
of just a single move like this. The
如果
mainly being
就
Luigi and
稍微
Kazuya, who
好
is
理解
actually
一点的
even
话，可
worse
能
in those respects,
就
preferring to
是
take the stocks
10
as
分
hero
钟
if they
刚
can get
看
away
完
with
就
it,
知道
the absolute criminals.
如果不行的话，我还得
Unlike
自己去
those
想一
two,
想。
and I
Yep.
can't believe I'm actually going to have to defend
Yeah.
Kazuya here.
you go-
That
you
is
go
at least
to-
alone what
know.
makes those characters so busted. It's not like it's the fourth thing on a huge list
基
of
本上我
already
1.5 倍
absurd
速
things the
看，
character can do. I don't really think characters being able
一
to
个
do
一
things
个
like this is
可能2
perfectly okay.
到
or
3 个
even
小
very
时
fun
学
design in
学
my
一节
opinion,
课，
but
差
those
不多。
characters at least have some other things holding them back, where Steve just kind of doesn't
I
in
was-
my
I
opinion.
was saying
I
that,
wish
but-
no character in the game was
今天肯定
consistently
能学
able to
完。
steal stocks out of nowhere like this. But here we are, that's the game.
现在就
The
开始
execution of this combo, however, is admittedly a
来
little
不错
tricky. It
把来
requires
不
a
再
very
重新
precise patterns
做
and
一
a
遍。
lot of fast movements, and it's even recommended to use a special control setup as well. It will take some trying to get to the point where you can do it consistently. However, it's not so hard it's unrealistic. It's been done many times in casual and tournament settings alike, and it's one of those things you can just practice to get better at it. It's not like it's some rare DI and percentage-based combo off a weird hitbox that's
这
impossible
样
to land.
你不要
It
跟
just
敌
takes
汉
some
打，
time
你
and
不需要
dedication
跟他
for a huge
PVC
payoff.
了。
You don't even have to
Ah,
do
it's
anything
fine.
a lot of the time. It's all relative to
Usually.
the percentage you're at. A lot of the time, just a single up tilt into up smash will
Wow,
take stocks way
这
ahead
是
of
什么
when they
角色啊？
Obviously,
为
I
什
do
么有一个这种
believe this was an
隐
oversight.
形人
Up
啊？
smash
刚才这个
will take
这什
stocks
么东
way
西？
It's all
啊，
relative
这个
to
我
the
Mr.
percentage
Game
you're
and
at. A lot
Watch，
of the time,
这是好像那种任天堂
up
最
smash will
最
take
出来的
stocks
第一
way
个
ahead
游
of
戏
when，they should. Obviously, I do believe
就
this
那种
was
红白机手
and
上
not
玩
at
的。
all I think Steve was supposed to be able to do. The whole move is
你
basically
玩过 Game Boy
balanced
吗？
around the
我
fact
不知道
that
你有没有
Steve's。jump height is very bad.
我好
and
像
he
以前
wouldn't be
玩
able
过
to，chain
我
them
玩过
together
火
like
影
this
忍者。
otherwise. While I can't really blame them
没有
directly
没有
for this,
肯定不在
the whole
Game Boy
thing
上肯定没有，那是 PSP 吧？Game Boy 是这个东西。
哦，那可能哦，那不是这个，可能高级一点，不是。哦，好像是那个第4个这个东西。
这个吗？你是不是玩的这个？
No，PSP 我也之前我哥也有，不是这个，是刚才这种。
哦，Game Boy Advance 有可能。我
这个
操，
我记得有火，嗯，
我玩过这个。
你以前小时候有吗？哦，
没有没有没有，这是我爸之前玩的，然后呢，他后面给我看了一眼，好像还可以用。Game Boy 上面有这个 Mr. Game and Watch。
哦，对，我操，就这个，哇，那个烧缸，我操！你不说，我感觉我都再也想不起来这个游戏了。你像我这个 Naruto，Bro this is crazy， 我操 ！Game Boy Advance。
然后这就是刚才这个角色，这个。
They should. Obviously,
Mr.
I
Game
do
and Watch.
this a lot of the time. Just a single up tilt into up smash will take stocks way ahead of when they should. Obviously, I do believe this was an oversight, and not at all I think Steve was supposed to be able to do.
啊，我有点
The
想
whole
买
move is
个
basically
PS。
balanced around the fact that Steve's
我
jump
想
height is
我想
very
我想
bad,
玩
and that he wouldn't
Pokemon。
be able to chain them together.
我之
like
前
this
拿那个
otherwise.
虚拟
While
机
I
去玩
can't，really blame them directly for this, with the whole thing
但
of
感
Steve
觉
only
怎么说
becoming
呢
a？ problem
感觉
after
玩的有
the
点
patch
不是很
and
爽。
such. I still have a lot of issues with how
它那个
the
模拟的
general.
按键还是
Like,
有
what are
点
you actually supposed to do in a
有点
situation
烂。
like this? If you're a slower character with worse full frame data, no other character really has anything like this where they just trap you in your shield. And the few characters that kinda have something similar have it as a part of a very specific and always counterable move. I guess their logic was that since the move is both an up tilt and an up air, then they have to make it as good as those two moves combined. Which would also explain why Steve's jab is so good. Turns out you actually don't need an up tilt at all, when you can just use your grounded up tilts 3 blocks off the ground. If you have golden tools when you use it in the air, it's literally the fastest fastest aerial move in the entire series duration-wise, which is just once again so indicative of how I feel they push so many boundaries with Fighters Pass 2, and not necessarily in a good way. Sometimes boundaries exist for a reason. Maybe a move should not be a projectile and a moving attack and a command grab. Maybe it's fine when the longest range in the game belonged to Byleth and Belmonts. Maybe it was fine not to have a command input move that has true combos out of it at any percent.
Steve 他有个键特别离谱，就是他那个minecart， 他那个 minecart 就是可以丢出去，然后呢他自己可以，他有点像 May 的那种海豚一样，就是他可以自己跳出来，然后但是这个海豚，
那个矿车吗？你说那个？
然后那个矿车摸到你的话，它是个 command grab， 它会把你送下去，就是跟着轨道送下去。然后呢，如果你不碰到轨道的话，你不碰到那个车的话，你被那个车侧面砸到的话，你会被就是直接打出去，然后伤害贼鸡巴高。
But he is far from innocent. Together they enable each other to become one of the most crazy things any character can do in this game. I don't really think I can understate the amount of destruction this combo is able to do, and the fact is that people will only get more and more consistent at this as they start optimizing and practicing it. Guess it's not such a bad time to be playing Shulk after all. In the following year, Steve would make his name known, and a lot of people were not just now aware of how good Steve was, but a lot of people were starting to pick up the character as well. Not long after Oculus showing at the Invitational, another Steve player would be the second to ever take a major win with Steve, that being Onin, winning GOML 2022, also not being a very known player before this. This would of course add more fuel to the fire, as now seemingly people were picking up this character and winning tournaments out of nowhere. But this tournament in particular was quite lacking in top players, so it wasn't really regarded as such a huge thing, the grand finals being Steve versus Ice Climbers, something very out of the ordinary at the time. Despite this, the conversation around this character would start to get a little spicy. A lot of people had some well-placed concerns about how this character would affect the meta of the game, and at worst, people feared it would be another Bayonetta situation, so Steve had many eyes on him going forward into the next tournaments. Oculus' recent showings may have been the catalyst for Steve's huge rise, but what was about to happen is probably the event that shaped the new age of Smash's meta, that being SmashCon 2022. SmashCon 2022 was by far the biggest tournament of the year, it actually being up until this point the biggest Smash tournament for Ultimate ever in terms of entrance. It had an astounding amount of top-level talent present. Oculus was not attending, however, so it seemed like the threat of Steve was calmed for the moment. The run back would have to wait for another time. However, reality is not often so simple, and in what seemed like an impossible feat, Steve was about to claim another tournament.
Safe for the moment. Munate's gonna get hit by the minecart, and that is it. Onin pops up.
He will have that bracket, and not to say it won't be any easier, but he is gonna go ahead and take
That's it.
3-0. But we also have Go. Oh no, the back air is gonna take it.
There's so many things that Steve can do, so many tricks, including that one, his final greatest trick.
Might be got a little momentum. He also does not have any resources for another anthem.
Oh, this is nuts.
That's it. That's it. That's it. Onin. The streak continues.
Onin wins SmashCon 2022, and if the floodgates were open before this, the whole dam is now shattered. This was a pretty huge deal at the time. Not only was Onin a relatively unknown player, but another Steve had taken another tournament, and not just any tournament, the biggest tournament of the year, beating a lot of really good and highly ranked players to get there. Steve went from almost having no significant results to winning 3 majors. Now it was not really a matter of potential, and it was looking like Steve did live up to expectations. After this, both Oculus and Onin would show up in a bunch of top 8s in the remaining year, and many other Steve players would land somewhere in the top 64 range. Oculus specifically would take many more tournaments, and was quickly rising through the ranks, being in the running for one of the best players in the game at the time. But in addition to that, Steve was really starting to catch on as a character. His usage data was quickly rising, and there were a lot more Steves at mid-skill levels, much like what usually happens when a character is a little too good. Everybody wants a slice of that top-tier pie. The sudden uptick in Steve's popularity resulted in quite a few things. A lot more labbing and optimization would happen during this time. If you don't know, this character has a ton of techs and optimizations, many of which were not discovered yet, or were underutilized. A lot of these were not exactly useful, more funny than good really, but if there was ever a character that just feels like they have an endless amount of tech to unearth, it's Steve, which I suppose is kind of appropriate when I think about it. However, a lot of additional techs were found that helped the character out in small ways, some techs being found just some months ago of writing this. There is of course one big tech that really made things a little bit tricky when talking about this character, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. For the moment, let's just pretend it doesn't exist and move on. The community around playing this character naturally spiked. People now had a solid blueprint on this character. They knew the character was good, good enough, and had seen them take down some of the best players in the world, all that mattered at this point was getting good at playing the character. You know, the actual being skilled at the game part. Steve, to be fair, does actually have a pretty steep learning curve. There's a lot you need to work on, not just in terms of tech, but also in terms of managing resources and stuff. So it's not like you can just pick up this character from the left, but if you do spend the time learning the character, it'll be well worth it. A combination of the massive surge of new Steve players and the rise of two previously unknown threats led to a bit of a panic in the community. I remember seeing a lot of people worried that this character would be another Meta Knight or Bayonetta situation, which I suppose is warranted in some ways. It had the signs of it, but it was all things considered a little too early to tell. A grand finals between Ocula and Onin sometime later did not exactly help the Steve allegations. To many this felt like a dystopian idea of what Smash would look like if Steve kept showing up, and it being kinda similar to Bayonetta Dittos in grand finals many years ago didn't exactly make people be more at ease. People were concerned, and a discussion around banning the character was slowly being taken a lot more seriously. At this point, Steve really was without a shadow of a doubt the best character in the game, and maybe even a bit of a problem for the community to figure out. There was of course still a lot to be learned about the character, lots of matchup experience to gain, and character knowledge to understand. Steve was here to stay, and he would only gain more popularity and infamy as time went by. The rest of Steve's moveset is, while not as outwardly powerful as previously discussed moves, are still very good in their own right, and we'll be taking a look at the rest of them now, but I obviously don't have as much to say about them as the previous moves. There's stuff to say here for sure, but a lot of these moves can just kind of be encapsulated by just one idea, which really is another one of the backbones of why this character is so good, that being the concept of diamonds and diamond tools, which leads us into crafting as a whole. Crafting allows you when at a crafting table to change your tools into the highest value resource you currently have. All the 5 different tools have different durability and damage multipliers. As you could expect, wood is the weakest, followed up by stone, then iron, and finally diamond being the strongest. Gold is the same strength as wood, however gold also makes your moves come out a little bit faster, so there's that to consider as well. Generally speaking, stone gives all moves that use the tools a 1.1 damage multiplier, iron gives a 1.2, and diamond has an absurd 1.35 times damage multiplier. We'll see to what extent diamond tools affect its moves in due time, don't worry. You have to be at a crafting table to be able to craft tools, which is not much of a drawback since you could just summon it to your position. Alternatively, it will just respawn after a few seconds if destroyed. If a tool breaks like a diamond pickaxe and you craft a new one of a lower tier, the other tools are not replaced. It always leaves the higher tier tools. Besides that, crafting is pretty simple. Diamond tools take a little bit longer to craft than the other ones, which all share at the same time. If you're a fast character, you can actually push Steve away from the table and cancel the craft, which is very funny, but don't get too comfortable doing it. Diamond tools are, how should I say this? Like, just extremely overpowered. Like, it adds a 1.35 times damage multiplier to all of Steve's attacks and use the tools, which is a massive increase over the next best thing, being 1.2 from iron tools. Like, we'll see, this causes some moves to become very disproportionately strong, kinda like in the case with Anvil earlier, since the knockback is not really compensated for the extra damage it now deals. I've already mentioned that there are a lot of characters that exist in varying states of strength. Sometimes characters are able to become more powerful for a short while, and some other
我操，
characters
有
get
点
more
牛
options
逼
after
啊
a！certain
这
percentage
个
is met.
国内的
This
这
is a
个
very
3DS，
important balance
我
to
刚
keep
刚
in
才
mind.
查，
These opportunities never come from
它可以
Aura needs
就你买了以后，
Lucario
它可以给你
to
装
get those crazy
装
release
游戏，
Mac has to get hurt a
它
bunch,
可以
kill
给你
one,
免，
and if
好
he
像是
misses,
这
it's
种
not gonna end well
破
for
解
him.
版
解
的
版
Other
感觉。
characters have other aspects to bring them down as well.
就是机器
Aura
好像
actually makes
是
Lucario
人
weaker
工
before
正
he
版，
gets to a
就
certain
二手
damage threshold,
就
so
我
while
看
it
了，
can
比
be
如说
beneficial for
就
you, it's also holding
700
you back to a certain degree.
700 多
There's
可以
always a
让
condition
你
that
自
we met
选
and worked around,
50个多
so
个游
price
戏
to，be paid to get the
挺
reward.
疯狂
That's
的，
kind
我
of what
操！
inherently keeps the balance of these characters in check. If these characters always had access
有
to
点
these
像。
tools, that would be pretty crazy. I think.
就是下次
But
什么
that's
打
also what
折
justifies
再
developers
说。
giving these characters these tools in the first place, which gives me how diamonds are implemented in this game, and why I think it's not exactly great. As you probably know, Steve starts out with wooden tools. This is the baseline, and anything better in terms of quality adds a different damage multiplier on top of the base damage, gold being the only exception as I mentioned. On paper, this is a perfectly fine way to balance diamond tools. They are super powerful, but Steve needs to mine to find them, meaning he won't have access to them at the start of the stock, which seems fair, right? You got your little condition and reward game, so what's the problem? Well, let's look away from the fact that having to mine is not really a cost, as discussed earlier, which, I mean, does kind of defeat the purpose of it a little bit, but the huge thing I think that makes diamond tools as strong as they are is just the fact that you can carry diamonds from one stock to another. Imagine if other characters like Joker could do something like this. Once Arsene triggers, he has the opportunity to just hang on to it and use it whenever he wants. Maybe he's close to losing his stock, so he'll just save it for the next one. And he could somehow store several Arsenes. But no, it's something that not only needs to be worked up to during the match, but you also have to capitalize on it when it triggers. It creates a sense of urgency for both players. When you play against him, you want it to go away as soon as possible, while Joker wants to get as much out of it as he can. There's many ways to get rid of it. You can play passively and wait until the timer runs out, or you can be more aggressive and try to hurt Joker so the meter depletes faster. Regardless of how it goes, Arsene is a very dynamic mechanic, largely because you don't have complete control over when it triggers. Steve, on the other hand, has complete control over diamonds, which leads to basically the same play pattern every time. Steve will try their best to get a diamond on the first stock, likely take too much damage to make it worth using then, but if you don't take too much damage, you make the tools then and there, and from there they will basically have guaranteed diamond tools on the next 2 stocks. And there's very little you can do about it, besides trying to stop Steve from mining in the first place, which is just the status quo anyways. Once he has them, it's basically just a permanent upgrade to the character, which again is basically a trait exclusive to Steve. No other character in this game can just become permanently better for doing a certain thing. It's always temporary. I guess you could argue that diamond tools do break, which is true of course. However, it does take a lot for that to happen, and if you manage to break them, you probably got some good value out of them anyways, or likely another diamond to replace it. It basically just comes back to the main issue with mining as a whole, but diamonds working the way they do just kind of exacerbates the issue. If it couldn't carry them over between stocks, I think the mechanic would be quite fair actually. Maybe you could do it so they appear a little bit earlier, but he would lose the ability to cruise 2 out of 3 stocks with almost guaranteed diamond tools. He probably wouldn't be able to get them until you had at least dealt a little bit damage to him, meaning he also would have less time to use them. There's probably tons of ways to fix this. But I guess the core of the issue really is just that diamond tools are a little too strong for how little effort it takes to get them. Going forwards, I'm going to be talking about the diamond versions of attacks mainly, because that's what Steve is going to be having most of the time realistically, and it's really where the moves start being problematic. Some of them are just really good on their own though, even without diamond. And no move is a better example of this than back air. Back air might seem on paper like one of his less outrageous moves, but I still think it's probably one of the most indicative moves of how strong Steve is as a character. It's just a classic, straight up, really strong move. No wacky projectiles, no funny block combos. No, this is just a really good move in the most basic way possible, worthy of a triple S rank. The move is safe, strong, and stupidly big. The move is admittedly a little strange in how it works. The hitbox looks like this, and as you can see, it's pretty huge. Steve swings his pickaxe behind him, and the move is actually weaker on the first 2 frames, and stronger on the last 3 ones. To start off, the move auto-cancels on short hop, meaning you can put out this massive attack with little risk of getting punished for it. Even if you just recklessly throw this around, it's only -6 on shield, which is very safe for a move that is this strong. However, the main issue here really is just how grossly overpowered the move is. And I mean that in the pure literal sense, like the move is just too juiced up. It's the problem with diamond tools that we'll see a lot more of as we go through these moves. Even on stage normally, the move just KOs way too early, and if you land it higher up close to the blast zones, it can just delete stocks way ahead of schedule. So remember when we talked about down air and how it can sometimes launch the other way than you would first think? Well, back air has that as well. You see, for some reason they decided that the 2 hitboxes on back air should launch at different angles. One that launches to the side and one that launches more upwards. This is very rare actually, since most single hit moves with several hitboxes only tend to launch a single direction, kinda specifically to make things like this not happen. When you give a move 2 fairly different angles to launch at, without compensating for the damage, that causes some problems. I think the reason they did this is because they wanted to give back air a sour spot, but didn't want to make the move deal less damage, which is usually how they go about doing that 99% of the time. And on paper, this does work. The sour spot angle makes the move longer in most circumstances, since it launches at a better angle for survival. Once again though, I don't think they accounted for the fact that people were going to be landing this move far up into the air. I think they banked on the fact that Steve has very high jump height, and would likely never get that far into the air, unless he built a little tower for himself like a fair Minecrafter. If you get comboed into the air with upfields like this, there's a fair chance that Steve can follow up with a back air, in which case, combined with the disproportionate knockback of diamond tools, you may get launched and KO'd off the top of the screen, if you get hit by the sour spot angle. This, once again, is avoidable by DI, if you know which hitbox you're getting hit by. Once again, we have the dichotomy where if you DI optimally, accounting for the sweet spot, you may get hit by the sour spot, and suddenly that's now bad DI, and the other way around. I think it's a bit silly that this is a thing, but I don't really think it's a huge deal overall. If you just DI down, you'll be fine against the sour spot, and even though it's far from perfect DI against the sweet spot, it's still better than wrong DI or no DI. You kinda have to cut your losses in a situation like this, seeing how most of the time Steve is pretty close to you after doing a ladder like this, and will likely land the sour spot anyways. You're better off just DIing down to be safe, and if it still KOs you off the side, at least you avoided being the top clip on Twitter that day. It's another case of the numbers being pushed a little too hard, and we end up with a move that KOs quite disproportionately early in some cases. It combos very nicely with a lot of Steve's panic options as well, being the perfect move to throw out after a minecart or down air, covering a lot of area in the process. This is a good time to bring up another thing Steve has, that being short hop macros. If you input a backer or forward air while short hopping, you'll get a move that looks like a variation of jab, which is a quick sword swing in front of or behind Steve. This is yet another thing Steve just gets to have, and in these cases it actually helps him out a lot. These moves are really fast out of shield. They come out on frame 7, which is not really close to the fastest in the game. That honor goes to this monstrosity, but 7 is still really good. It's the same frame as Cloud's uppy out of shield, so if you think that move is quick, these are just as fast. These little moves might seem innocent enough, but they're a lot better than you would think. For one, they actually give Steve a quick way to punish up close attacks on his shield. The hitboxes are not massive, but good enough to punish most attacks close by. Without these, pressuring Steve's shield would be a lot easier, which is probably why it would have been a good idea to not make him have this. They also happen to combo into forward air and back air at early percentages, and sometimes later if DDI incorrectly. This is a bit unnecessary to say the least. I mean, these moves are already excessive enough. It's not like it's a major aspect of the character, but I feel like Steve has enough going for him that maybe we could have cut these. I guess they felt bad that Jab and up tilt ate up so many moves being combined like this, resulting in less unique moves overall, but they already compensated for that by making them really good moves, with you being able to move around and stuff while using them. I guess they thought it would not be quite enough, or maybe they thought that Steve would be too helpless if he didn't have any jabs out of shield options. I mean, it kind of would make sense for Steve's out of game to be slow. For whatever reason they decided to add these moves. It's definitely just another layer of flossing on this already very expensive cake. Since we're already on the topic, I guess we can talk about forward air as well. This move is a lot like that, being a pickaxe thing downwards. However, the most notable and infamous part of this move is the fact that there's a spike on the later part of this move. This enables a whole bunch of combos that the character has no business doing. You can basically extend any combo by doing a forward air, since the hit stun from the spike will keep them in place, and since it launches you directly down, you always have your opponent where you want them, which can lead to even more combos or maybe even another forward air. The way this move allows for combos like this is very strong. I don't really know if they intended for it to be as good as it is. I mean, surely they must have, right? Since down throw the forward air seems like the most successfully set up combo of all time. Jab helps a lot in these combos as well, having just the perfect knockback to land the second part of the move. The whole combo usually won't end in meaning a knock, unless they manage to make up tilt into it or something. But the amount of damage that even just a normal forward air does is so high in the diamond tools. Outside of combos and strength, the move is pretty easy all around. It's fast and powerful. The hitbox not too half bad either. Oh yeah, and it's also the reason why if you get hit by minecart and fall off stage, you're basically done for. These moves were basically designed for each other. The whole idea of putting a spike on a forward air like this was maybe not the best. Of course, there's a lot of moves that are spikes that are down air, but I usually feel like they're a little bit more careful when implementing them. Most of them don't lead to scenarios like this where you can do combos, for example. The move usually doesn't come up too much outside of these two situations though. Two situations which I might add come up quite often. Overall, the move really is fine, but it just happens to be a very critical part of C's combo game, and those combos can easily deal around 40 to 60% without much problem, and with very little counterplay, so it's definitely a very strong move in that sense. Steve's grab is a bit of a strange case in my eyes. In one way, having a slow, long-range grab makes the character not as good at dealing with shields as he would be otherwise, but in this game normal grab stocks are at an all-time low anyways, so it's not like he's missing out too much. If he had a normal grab, it would likely be one of those really slow ones like Belmont's or something, in which case having a long-range grab is basically always better. As it stands, I think he benefits a lot more from having a somewhat slower grab with more range than one with bad range and pretty mediocre lag. If you compare the move to some of these